Today I'm going to show you how to make this 3-layered pink ombre heart-shaped cake for Valentine's Day. This looks a lot more complicated than it actually is, so let me show you how easy it is to bake and decorate this cake. These are the ingredients that you'll need. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is get our cakes ready. I have made up some white cake mix here. You can either do this from a packaged mix or you can make it from scratch like I did. If you use cake mix from a box, it ends up using 2 boxes. And once you get that mixed up, you want to divide that equally into 3 equal portions. For my cake mix, it ended up being about 3 cups of cake batter. If you're using a boxed mix, it ends up being about 2 3/4 of a cup of cake batter for each layer. Now, once you get your batter divided into 3 equal portions, you can color this up. I'm going to be doing 3 varying shades of pink, a dark pink, a medium pink, and a very, very light pink. I'm going to start off here with the medium pink, and I'm using Americolor's gel food coloring in super red. For the medium pink, I only need 1 drop of the super red in there. I'm going to mix this up well, make sure that there's no streaks in there. For our top layer, the lightest pink, I'm going to be using 1 scoop of the medium pink, and I'm just going to blend that into the white cake batter, and that'll tint this just ever so slightly pink. And then for the darkest pink, I ended up using about 4 drops of the super red, and that gave me a nice deep pink color. Now, since this is a heart-shaped cake, I'm going to be using heart-shaped cake pans for this. You can buy these relatively inexpensive at Michael's, Hobby Lobby, even Walmart sells them now. And these pans are 8-inch by 2-inch heart-shaped cake pans. Now I want to make sure that these cakes come out nice and clean out of the pan, so I'm going to line the bottom with some parchment paper. Now to make a template for these, I'm just going to invert the pan onto a piece of parchment, trace around the outside, and then cut it out so it fits nice and snug into the bottom of the pan. And when I get those templates cut out, I'm going to lightly grease the bottom of the pan and then put a little bit more vegetable shortening around the outsides, because again, we want to make sure that these come out nice and clean. I'm going to take my parchment here and lay it in and kind of smooth out any air bubbles that may be in there. And then I'm just going to pour my cake batter right in there. Now you can get 3 pans and bake all these layers at one time, or you can just get 1 pan and do them separately. It doesn't really matter, it depends on how much you want to invest in this and how much money and time. You just want to get your cake batter in there, spread it out to the edges, make sure it's nice and level on top, maybe tap it down, make sure there's no air bubbles in there. And then you want to bake this according to the recipe's instructions. Once your cakes are finished baking, you can go ahead and let them cool for about 5 minutes in the pan and then turn them out onto a wire rack and let them cool completely. And once they are completely cool, I'm going to level off the top of each layer. I want to make sure that each layer sits perfectly flat, and the best way to do that is to level off the top of the cake. I'm just going to use a knife and skim off the very top layer of the cake. Now it works best if you use a serrated knife. I don't have one that's large enough for this, so I'm using the largest knife that I have. And you want your finished layer to be between 1 inch and 1.5 inches thick. But you want to make sure that all 3 layers are the same thickness. Next, I made up some buttercream frosting. This cake is kind of a frosting hog, so you're going to end up needing about 8 to 10 cups of buttercream. Now, I didn't show how I make mine in this video. There are plenty of recipes online and videos here on YouTube that show how to make that. Just go ahead and use your favorite one. I'm going to spread just a little bit of frosting out onto my plate, and this will keep our cake in place as we frost it, as well as when we go to move it. I'm going to put my first layer, which is the darkest pink, almost a red color, right down on top of that. I'm going to press it down, make sure it's well adhered to the plate. Then I'm going to take some more buttercream, and I'm going to lightly frost the top of this. Now I'm using an offset spatula for this. This is the best tool for this job. They're only a couple dollars at craft stores or even Walmart. You can just use a butter knife for this or a regular spatula, that's perfectly fine. But I find the offset spatula to work best. I'm just going to put a nice even layer of buttercream right on top, about 1/4 inch thick or so. And this will help to glue our layers together. Once I get that on, I'm going to smooth it off a little bit, make sure there's no big lumps or anything. And I'm just taking the frosting right out to the edge. Now I'm going to take my second layer here, which is the medium pink. And if I didn't mention it before, make sure and take the parchment paper off as you're assembling this. You don't want to really cut into that and eat it. I'm just going to lay the second layer right up on top, press it down just a little bit so it stays in place. And then again, you want to go ahead and frost the top of this. making sure to again get about a 1/4 inch layer of frosting on there. And then you want to finish off with your top layer. Now you notice that I am putting these layers face side down, so the part of the cake that touches the bottom of the pan is actually up. That tends to be a smoother surface and it's easier to frost, so that's why I'm doing it like that. And again, you want to press this down, make sure it's adhered nicely to the layer below. Now for the top layer, you don't need quite as much frosting on there because we're just going to incorporate that top layer of frosting into our crumb coat. You want to make sure that the top of your cake is completely covered. And now I'm going to start worrying about getting this nice and smooth, because this will be the foundation for all of our decorative piping. And now I'm going to put a layer of frosting around the outside edge of the cake. And again, this is going to be part of the crumb coat. And this is where it is really, really nice and handy to use an offset spatula because it works perfectly for this. So using my offset spatula, I'm just going to take the buttercream and put a nice even layer all the way around the outside of the cake. And you want to make sure and smush that frosting into between the layers so you don't have any air pockets or air gaps in there. And basically what this does is it seals all the loose crumbs into the cake so it doesn't end up in your finished frosting and the decorative frosting that you put on the outside. Now this isn't too terribly important with this particular decorating technique because you're not going to be working the buttercream, a whole lot, but I still like to do it because it does give a nice, even, clean foundation to put my piping on. Now, if when you were leveling off the cakes, you happen to have a piece that broke off or whatever, and one of your layers is kind of shallow on one side, now is the time to fill it in with that frosting. Another benefit of doing a crumb coat. And you just want to go all the way around the cake and get a nice, even layer on there. It doesn't have to look pretty because it's all going to be covered up. It doesn't matter if there's crumbs in it or the cake is showing, because again, it's all going to be covered up. You just want to get a nice clean coat all the way around. Now for the top, I'm just going to kind of level it off, and some of that frosting is going to go over the edge. That's perfectly fine. Just go along the edge and scrape it off and make sure you get a nice sharp point there, because whatever shape your cake is in now, whatever shape you make it, is going to be what the finished shape of your cake is going to be. And once you get your crumb coat done, you want to go ahead and let this dry for a couple hours before you start piping out the decorative piping. Now I'm going to take the remainder of my frosting here, I'm going to divide it evenly into 4 equal portions, and I'm going to again color this into 3 varying shades of pink. I'm also going to leave 1 portion white. And just go ahead and play around with the coloring and amounts needed to get a nice gradation of pink. You want a very dark pink, kind of a darkish medium pink, a light pink, and then finally just white, which you won't need any food coloring for. And once you get that all mixed up, you want to go ahead and put these into pastry bags. And in my pastry bag, I've got a 2A tip in there, made by Wilton. It is a large round tip, and I'm going to be doing my entire cake with that tip. Now this really helps if you use 4 different pastry bags for this. I only have 1, so I had to wash between each layer. It was kind of a pain, but I managed to do. Now for the decorative frosting, I'm going to be doing what they call a petal design. And I'm going to be doing this from bottom to top instead of around, like most of the ombre cakes that are out there. For this particular shape, for the heart shape, I just kind of like it going from up and down rather than side to side. It just looks better to me. But this is a very simple technique. All you're going to do is pipe out little dots around your cake, about 3/4 of an inch wide. And you want to make sure and put those little dots right next to each other so they just barely touch. And this is going to be the foundation for the rest of your cake. So you want to make sure that this beginning row is absolutely perfect and spaced perfectly, because once you get going, you can't change it. And I'm just going to go all the way around the cake, making these little dots of frosting. And once you get all the way back around to the beginning, it is time to add the magic. Now again, this is where the offset spatula really comes in handy. I'm just going to press this into the dot of the frosting, and as I press it into the dot, I'm going to pull up along the cake. Now you want to be careful with this because you don't want to press too hard and end up mixing the outer layer of frosting with the crumb coat. That ends up making kind of a mess, so just very lightly press it and pull up. Now if you opted not to use an offset spatula for this, You can use a butter knife for this, or you could even just use the back of a spoon, and that would be perfectly fine too. It'll give you the same effect. And I'm just going to go all the way around, mashing and pulling these dots up, and this is what creates the little petals. And once you've got all the petals made on the first row, you can go ahead and start the second. I'm going to be using the same color here because I'm going to do 2 rows of each color until we get to the top. And right above each petal, I'm going to make another dot about 3/4 of an inch wide. Again, until they just barely touch. You want to do this about an inch above where the bottom of the petal of the row below is. You want to keep in mind that when you mash this down and pull it up to create the petal, it does kind of push the row down just a little bit. So keep that in mind when you're doing this. And again, I'm just going to take my offset spatula and press it down to the top of each little dot of frosting and pull straight up. Now you may notice as you're going around, you start getting these little clumpies on the edge of your petals. Just go ahead and clean off your spatula, and that'll eliminate those little bumpies. And keep going all the way around until you're finished with that row. Now for the middle row, I'm going to be using the middle shade of pink. And again, I'm just going to plop the little blobs of frosting out. And now is when you want to start watching and make sure that your rows of frosting are level on the cake. What I mean by that is, if you start out at 2 inches down from the top, you want to make sure that you stay 2 inches down all the way around for that row. I know it's kind of confusing and I don't explain it well, but you just want to make sure that your rows are nice and level. Now when you change colors, it is particularly important to wipe off your spatula quite often. You don't want the color of the frosting from the row below mixing in with the color that you're doing now. Now I ended up doing 2 rows of the medium pink, and I'm going to top this with the lightest pink. And once we get to these top layers, you can kind of even yourself out if you didn't stay level in the earlier rows. So there is some leeway there. Now for the very last row of petals on the side of our cake, I'm just going to pipe out the little dollop of frosting right at the top of the cake. And this is why I stress to keep those layers nice and level all the way around, because this is when it really starts to show up if you didn't keep them level. Another thing to keep in mind when you're doing this last row of petals is that you want to scrape off your spatula between each petal. You will have a lot of frosting that comes off because you're not smearing it up the side of the cake, and you don't want to take it over the top edge either. So just wipe it off on your finger between each petal, and then we are done with the sides. Now it's time to concentrate on the top. Now for the top of the cake, I'm going to be using the white frosting, and I'm going to pipe out the little dollops of frosting on the very edge of the cake. The little dollops actually go kind of halfway off the cake, down the side, and about half of it stays on the top. And again, you want to make sure that these line up with the row beneath them. You put a little dollop of frosting on top of each petal. Now for the top, I'm just going to be pulling the little petals straight into the inside of the cake. At the same time, when I'm pressing the spatula into the dollop of frosting, I'm kind of pressing down a little bit, and that will make the tip of the petal kind of fall down over the side of the cake at the same time. It gives it really kind of a neat effect. I'm just going to go through and finish off all these. Now for this next row of white, you really don't have to worry too much about the placement of the dollops of frosting. You just want to make sure that they are evenly spaced all the way around the cake. They don't have to line up with the row before, but you still want them next to each other and touching. And again, 3/4 of an inch size dollop of frosting. And again, with this row of petals, you want to pull them straight to the center of the cake. And you want to keep going all the way around until you get all of those little petals formed on this row. And then I'm going to switch out to the light pink, and again, pipe out a little row of dollops all the way around. And again, not worrying about if they line up with the row before. You want to go all the way around and form your little heart shape. And at that inside corner, I like to leave it blank until I get the frosting or get the petals pulled out. And then I'll put one last dollop right there for the point and pull that out. And I'm only going to do 1 row of the light pink, and I'm going to finish this up using 1 row of the dark pink. And this is where it gets kind of tricky pulling these petals to the inside because there's not a whole lot of room there, but just kind of work at them and get them pulled towards the center. Make sure you clean off that spatula well. And then finally, for the very center, using the very darkest pink, almost a red, I'm going to pipe out a heart shape. Basically all you do is place your piping tip about a 1/4 inch above the cake, pipe out and pull away at the same time, and that will finish up the center of your cake very nicely. And that is how I made a 3-tiered pink ombre heart-shaped cake for Valentine's Day. Hope you guys enjoy, and thanks so much for watching.